please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I am calling the September 18th, 2024 Select Board to order at 5:30 p.m. We have made some changes to the agenda, but the agenda online is updated to what is going to actually happen tonight. And then announcements. Libby?
This meeting is being video and audio recorded. The town will be holding flu and COVID-19 vaccine clinics on Saturday, October 5th and Saturday, October 19th from 9:30 to 4 at the Nantucket Elementary School cafeteria off Bacchus Lane. So hopefully people will make a note of that and get their vaxes. At its meeting on September 12th, 2024, the Select Board reviewed, and that was an executive session meeting, the Select Board reviewed executive session minutes of July 20th, 2020 and July 26th, 2020, and determined that continued non-disclosure was required as the purpose of those executive session minutes remains ongoing, such that the negotiating and litigation positions of the town may be jeopardized by disclosure at this time. That was prompted by public records request. And that is it for announcements.
Okay, any other Select Board announcements or comments?
Can I just note, for those vaccine clinics, there are 3 flyers in the packet in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and they're online as well.
Yep, if people want to pull them and share them on social media, that would be great. I'd like to thank the community for coming out for town meeting, a long one last night, and thanks to town staff, the moderator, and everyone who participated in making the town clerk's office, everyone who makes the town meeting run. Much appreciation to everybody. Not the outcome that I had hoped for, but here we are. Okay. We do not have any follow-up comments from prior Select Board meetings, but I do want to note town administration is working on them. We've just been distracted and focused on a lot of other things. So the last few meetings, we will get back to them next week. Now opening public comment. This is the time for public comment for items not otherwise on the agenda. Is there anyone here who would like to make a public comment? And anyone online, please raise your digital hand if you'd like to make a public comment. Seeing none, there is no new business. So we'll move on to approval of minutes, warrants, minutes and warrants. Any changes, comments on any of the minutes, or a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, up next is, Libby, do you want to introduce, or?
Sure. Joe Grouse, Chair of the Town Council Study Committee, is here, and he is going to give an update of the committee's work to date and perhaps some other requests.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the time. I'm here to give you an update on the activities of the Town Council Study Committee. On June 26th, the Town Council Study Committee voted unanimously, with one abstention, to move forward with drafting a new charter for a town council form of government. After some diligent research, basically February through June, as requested by the Select Board, we reviewed the various other options available to Nantucket, and we really came to the conclusion that I think the voters will be and can be persuaded that the town council form offers some advantages to Nantucket, superior to open town meeting, representative town meeting, or mayor city council forms of government. We're roughly halfway through a process of composing a new town charter that would be part of an article that the voters in town meeting would get to vote upon. And given candidly how dramatic a change this might be if it actually comes to pass, we felt that it was appropriate in terms of all the characteristics of the town administration and town government. We've basically tried to change as few things as possible in terms of how the town is run, how the town is organized, as we work on this draft charter. So far, the key decisions we have come to are setting up a town council that would have 9 councilors serving 3-year terms and elected at large as opposed to from precincts here on the island. Most town council, town manager towns, there are about 13 of them in the state right now, the town manager really ends up being the appointing authority for most boards, committees, and commissions, and we've basically followed that model as advised and supported by the consultant that's helping us, the Collins Center from UMass. Most elected boards we've left alone as elected, and we really haven't made any dramatic changes on that front. We also would expect that the town councilors will, as you do, select board members, would act as county commissioners for the county of Nantucket. A couple of open issues that we haven't made final decisions on or we're still kind of chewing on are whether or not it would make sense to place a town councilor. The Collins Center recommended the president of the town council, but really any town councilor on the school committee as a liaison between the school committee and the town council. I did have a conversation with Pauline Proch about that before she resigned. And really, it's a kind of an open issue. Apparently, it's being done by some other towns in the Commonwealth. Another issue would be whether there's any benefit at this stage to combine the water commission and with a sewer commission, to have a joint water and sewer commission. Again, that may add some more complications to this whole process, more than we would want, but it's been raised in some of our meetings. And then finally, everyone's favorite, the NP and EDC, which is something of a controversial body in town these days, and we haven't really dealt with how would that work, how would the planning director, who would that person report to, and so on. We have moved on to increase the amount of public outreach that we've been doing. A number of the members of our committee have, over the summer, addressed various homeowners associations, the Nantucket Civic League, the Nantucket Non-Voting Taxpayers Group, kind of talking about what we're doing and why we think it's a good idea. We have scheduled 2 public forums in October, one on Saturday, October 5th, 10 o'clock in the morning, and one on Thursday, October 10th at 5:30 p.m., both here in this room. We have established a email address for the Town Council Study Committee so that citizens can deliver to us public input and ask any questions. At Libby's request, and I think it made perfect sense, we've given KP Law a copy of the charter that we have to date. As I said, it's about half completed. One of the things in my conversation with Libby a couple of weeks ago, she said there were some questions from some of you on the select board about how might this work out, how might this play out. And I guess the way I perceive it is that the draft town charter and county charters would be incorporated into an article at a future town meeting. My preference, our committee's preference, would be town meeting 2025. If approved at the meeting, the so-called special municipal legislation would be submitted to the State House, much the way a home rule petition would be submitted. Once that's acted on at the state level, it would come back here to Nantucket and need to be approved at the ballot in a town election, call it 2026. And then if it is approved at the town meeting and at the ballot, the select board would have to basically create a transition committee and come up with a more focused plan about how do you actually convert from one form of government to another. So I guess the sum of that is, even if everything worked perfectly from our committee's perspective, it's probably 2026 or 2027 before any of this could actually happen. we're working diligently to have these things done by November, December of 2024. We hope to have them ready for the citizen article deadline. If that looks problematic, we would probably come back and ask to whether the select board would consider to support this process by making the article a select board article. I understand there's maybe some issues about why that is or isn't such a great idea. And I guess finally, I would like to note that we couldn't have done the work that we've done without the support of the Collins Center from UMass. They've been terrific and really have provided an awful lot of detail and legal background for us, since really none of us on the committee are lawyers or anywhere near experts on town organizations. So I would like to thank the select board and town administration for supporting us and supporting the consulting contract with the Collins Center. And I think with that, thanks again for your support, and I'd be happy to handle any questions.
Questions from the board? Malcolm?
Yeah, nice work. I'm glad you're suggesting at large, because I've always wondered if you have 9 positions, so you're going to have 3 every election period, I would assume. But sometimes we only get 3 candidates for a select board position. Does that mean you would just walk on the select board, I guess, without an election?
Well, Malcolm, in all honesty, I have no idea how many people will run for these seats.
That's my next question.
When we discuss the number of councilors, the range in the state seems to be 5 to maybe 11 in terms of the 13 communities that have town council forms. I think the committee kind of felt that 7 was too few. 9 was a number that kind of diluted, if you will, political power. And that was kind of where the 9 of us kind of ended up. Where I am curious how these public forums that we're holding next month, what people come back and sort of tell us in those meetings. We could certainly always go back and change that number. It's not written in stone at this stage.
That's fine. I have one more follow-up.
Sure.
So you picked at large over zones per se. So a lot of people are telling me, oh, this is great. Now Nantucket will be representative. Now Sconset will be representative. Why did you choose that form?
Mainly because it's extraordinarily difficult to draw appropriately scaled precincts on a place like Nantucket, where 80 or 90% of the year-round population, the voting population, lives within about a mile of downtown. You basically, when you set up precincts, the minimum number of inhabitants that go into a precinct is 400. I think 4,000 is we happen to talk about this today. And I think you'd end up with sort of these crazily shaped, I'll use the word gerrymandered, but crazily shaped defined areas of land to try to keep equal numbers of inhabitants in it. And candidly, it's a pretty small island.
I mean, a lot of states always do that. Why can't we?
I know. Well, we could. I think it would be hard to do.
I think that's going to be at your public meetings. I'd be prepared. That's been one of the biggest complaints I've heard.
And I've gotten them as well. We've had people email and call us and talk about, gee, can't wait for you guys to put precincts in, because it's going to really make sure that Nantucket gets the representation it needs, and we'll see what happens.
Nice work, thank you.
So I would say, when I think about that, right, if you have 75 registered voters in Nantucket, you'd have to include Upper Main Street in Nantucket, which eliminates the fact that there's a representative for Nantucket right off the top. It doesn't work.
Outnumbered from day one.
Yeah.
I mean, we can certainly, I think, Malcolm, you're right. I think we'll get people, asking us to consider this more strongly, and maybe there's some ways to do it, but I just think you'd end up with these really nutty-looking strips of land, running out to Sconset and to Nantucket to somehow get 400 or whatever the right number is, people in the zones. So.
Pie slices off the rotary.
And you'd want, well, I'd kind of think you'd want them to be aligned with something. I think there's 9 districts in the Coastal Resiliency Plan or something. You'd want them aligned with something so that people can easily understand when you say you're in such and such.
But the population doesn't carve out that way.
Yeah, it may not,
So,
yeah. I don't know, it probably
yeah.
doesn't, so that's interesting.
I mean, I kind of like, the idea of one Nantucket and let's do this together, but we'll see, I mean.
I will say, I think Nantucket is very organized and very vocal, and I think they get pretty well represented as, we always pick on them because we always use them as an example because they're easily defined, but I think, I think I hear a lot from Nantucket. I think people there are pretty well represented. My concern on a lot, I think this is, I'm glad you're having forums. I think that those are going to be very helpful. I'm concerned that, and I've heard from some people that this is going to be a hard sell, that people like being, going to town meeting, they like having the say. It's been described to me as, some people say, well, okay, do you want to trust the, people in the front row to make all the decisions, or you want us, this is what we're going to hear at town meeting if we try to do it, or do you want all of us in the crowd, which do you trust more? That's going to be kind of the pitch that you're going to be facing.
Right.
And I think I think it's going to take a very, very good presentation and it may take much more time and focus than I think any of us envision.
Right. Well, I certainly would admit it may or may not happen on the first time around.
Yeah.
Right. Number two, I think you have to think about, what did we have? 800 people last night at town meeting? I mean, and I don't, a lot of those people clearly like town meeting. They're active participants in town meeting, but there are 9,000 other potential voters on the island who, for whatever reason, don't have the time, the interest, can't afford, whatever. So it's clearly part of, I think what I've always said in our meetings, and I think the committee would agree with me, is part of our strategy has to see if we can find a way to get, I don't know, put a number on it, 750 people that don't normally come to town meeting and come and speak their minds, because part of the reason we're doing this, or that the committee wants to do this, is because the town meeting doesn't really represent the voters of this island terribly well. It there is a very small active group of people that like town meeting, and 9,000 people who just can't seem to find the time to show up. So.
I'd like to have this board think a little bit about the process of how this moves forward to a warrant. And I think really the question that I would be wondering is, does this board think it's appropriate or have the desire to do this as a select board article versus a citizen warrant article? And I wanted to ask that question tonight so that these guys can have a sense of where they're going to be going process-wise with town meeting. Tom?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think, so we actually talked a little bit about this in Town Council Study Committee today, and my feeling was that as a select board member, that it isn't my role as ex officio on that committee and as a select board member, as the executive body for the town, to support an article that dissolves the legislative body. To me, that is not in keeping with my role. Whatever the will of the committee is, when the charter comes out for the town and county, if they want to file that as a citizens warrant article, they're more than welcome to. And I've probably given too much input in our meetings about many, many things. I have quite strong opinions on this, and that's just my feeling. I don't know how my colleagues feel, but I think this should be more grassroots. It should come from a citizens warrant article and should come at an appropriate time when it can have the hearing it deserves when there isn't a very full agenda in either an annual or a special.
So my question is, would you want us to sponsor it after we got beat on last night? We got beat pretty strongly in Article 1. I kind of think, I see the advantage of what, Tom is saying. I'm kind of joking, I'm kind of not.
Yeah.
I do think there's a lack of, in a large part of the voters right now, I think there's a lack of trust in parts of our government. And I think that we're working to, build that back up. But I think that is, it's part of why we're here.
No, I mean, I think our preference would be to have this as a citizens article. Our concern is in terms of the time frame and the number of sections of the charter and then the county charter to be sort of reviewed at the end. We're pushing up into November, December, and I just don't know where we're going to fall vis-a-vis that deadline. We also chatted today about, the ability to get 200 signatures and, in effect, have a special town meeting. That may have some pros and cons in terms of the focus on this particular article, as well as not being on what I understand will be a crowded article next May, so a crowded warrant next May. So we'll see. I think,
Madam Chair. I'm maybe not as passionate as my colleagues, but I don't see a problem with us sponsoring it. To me, as Joe said, this may take a couple of times at town meeting. And I think we should get to it as soon as possible. It'll help us understand what the issues are, where we're going. And I think it's just window dressing, whether it's, people know that it came from this group, even if we sponsor it. I think our label isn't that strong. I don't think our label's that strong, maybe in line with what my colleague, Mr. Fee, said. So I would have no objection to us sponsoring it.
Yeah, after you've done your hearings, the other possibility might be to go through the hearing process with the FinCom and the planning board and everybody, and have a sense of the meeting, and not try to get the whole Megillah voted on night one, but maybe get to town meeting, have the discussion, and have it not be a life or death decision. We all have to do that night. But okay, is there, do people if people that feel strongly, give them the voice that night, and then come back with 100% article once you hear them.
Fix it to respond to that.
Yeah, so a bit's more serious than just saying we're going to have, we're going to have a meeting, we're going to have and no one will show up, or the same 10 people will show up twice. This is town meeting, and you might have 1,000.
Right.
And so maybe it's somewhere in between, pushing and trying to get the whole thing done. And I would let you guys sort of feel that out as you go through the process.
Well, I'm sorry.
If you want to
first.
respond.
Go ahead and respond, Joe, to that.
I was just going to say, we're more than happy to work with Libby and the select board, and as we get closer to the year end, and kind of the package is 80% or 90% ready, we can sort of see what makes the most sense. So, sorry.
Go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, I actually wouldn't have a problem either with the select board sponsoring it, because it was something that came to town meeting and we formed the committee. And I think that it's more of a putting it out there rather than necessarily saying that this is definitely the way we want to go. We want to have the discussion, and it gives them a little more time. So I would be comfortable with that.
I'd be disinclined to have it perceived as an endorsement of the select board. I think sort of echoes what Tom was saying, or endorsed by the select board. I also think, Matt's idea about if the nuts and bolts aren't done in time, for ATM, to convert it to more of a framework discussion and sense of a meeting, and just see like where does town meeting stand on this? I mean, if it fails, I mean, if the sense of the meeting gives you an idea that you're not ever going to get close, then you take the time to do outreach, and educate the community and persuade voters to reconsider it at a later town meeting. I don't know. I mean, I know what was, was voted on was to study it. It wasn't to adopt it. So I'm,
Right.
you know,
I mean, for what it's worth, I mean, I certainly don't think that the group of voters that were at town meeting last night would be in favor. I would assume it was the majority of people who are big fans of open town meeting. But I can also tell you that in the, call it 8 to 10 meetings that our committees had with various groups, and, you know, there are a lot of people who are kind of, don't go to town meeting, don't like town meeting, you know, think it's cumbersome, blah, all the things that would be the anti-argument. So there are definitely people out there on the island who think, this thing is, you know, it's seen its day. You know, that doesn't get you to a winning vote, but there are certainly people, I think, that are not opposed. So.
If you had asked for a vote at the end of last night, you would have gotten it. We were all ready to vote for it.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
yeah. So appreciate all the work that's going into this. I think one thing we need to think about is if this is going to go on the warrant as a charter change, we need to be prepared to offer the legal resources to make sure that it's in absolute correct form to send off to the legislature. I don't think it can come to us written by non-professionals, right? So, I mean, Libby has asked me to, you know, ask the board this question: are we comfortable committing town legal resources to review of this in preparation of putting it on a warrant in some form, and the distinction between doing that as a citizens warrant article or a select board sponsored article is about, you know, the quantity of that resource. It would be unique to have a lot of town council time spent on a citizen warrant article, though we did a little bit more of that with short-term rental stuff. So anyway, you want to comment?
I might want town council to comment, but as it is, there is most likely not sufficient time between now and the deadline, which is not set yet, but it's most likely going to be the first or second week of November, to have a review that is sufficient to produce an article that would meet check all the legal boxes. But John can comment on that a little bit more.
As a citizen warrant article versus select board, or either?
By the deadline, I'm not, he and I have talked a little bit about this. I'm not even sure by the board's deadline, but John can comment about what all is entailed in developing a proper article.
Okay, I'd love to hear from Mr. George on that. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Obviously, this would be a significant undertaking for my office to do a deep dive into reviewing the draft of the charter. And I'm going to call it a charter revision as opposed to an amendment. And because this would be a major charter change, obviously. So the first thing that I would say is we would need to have a complete document submitted to us, because there are a lot of questions about how you're going to have to amend your county charter, assuming you decide to go with the town council acting as the county commissioners. There are a number of provisions in your existing charter that don't really go towards the question of your form of government, but you do have some unique provisions in your charter, and we would need to think carefully about what provisions in the existing charter would move over to a new charter revision that are not directly related to the town council form of government. So that's going to be I think, a pretty exhaustive effort. I tend to agree with Libby. If the goal here is to have this done as a citizen's petition, I don't think there's enough time to do that. Because, we, other than I think one meeting that Libby and I had with the group, we really haven't been involved in those deliberations, which is fine, but at some point we need to do a deep dive. And again, as I said, you really have to look carefully at your existing charter and see, is there anything in there that merits carrying over to your new, to the new charter. In terms of town council resources, this is real. I haven't discussed this with Libby, but we do these kinds of charter reviews all the time. And that is a specialty that we have. And I don't think it's realistic to think we could do that within the retainer. I believe that we have indicated that those kinds of things are outside the retainer. So I would, now the other thing is, I will offer you the example of the town of Sandwich, which had a charter review committee, and most of their work were doing fairly routine amendments to the charter, but they also wanted to look at the question of whether to do a representative town meeting or a town, a town council charter. And they decided to bring it to town meeting as a non-binding directive, something like to see if the town will direct the charter review committee to propose a town council form of government. It's non-binding. It certainly would give you all a platform to discuss it, get public input, and see where it goes. Now, the problem I will tell you is, and Libby can certainly talk to the town manager in Sandwich, town meeting voted pretty resoundingly not to pursue a different form of government. They have, like you, an open town meeting. And so it was a pretty definitive vote, and they basically backed off from investing any more time or effort in doing a major charter revision, such as a town council form of government.
Okay. Tom?
John, have you ever seen a town do a non-binding ballot question, sort of a la what Sandwich did at their town meeting?
Yeah, so the only entity that can put a non-binding question on a ballot is the select board. And I believe that has to be done at the annual town election. So the select board could certainly do that. There is an alternate process that allows for a petition to be circulated, and if it's signed by a sufficient number of voters, as a non-binding question, it goes to the select board. And if the select board declines to put it on, then they have to go out and get more signatures, and they can force it to go on a ballot. So the answer, Tom, is yes, we've seen that. It's a fairly cumbersome process unless the board just goes ahead and votes to put it on.
Now, we did have such an issue maybe years and years ago about controlling of Lyme disease, and there was a ballot question.
So
So we have we have a history of doing that.
Yeah. So that idea, Tom, I think is brilliant, because then you're polling the people who would be showing up to vote for town councilors, right? As opposed to only the people who come to town meeting already.
Right, as long as you promote that that's what, yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to see another form of government come and vote, it would be a really interesting measure of interest in the community, different from a non-binding article or sense of the meeting at town meeting. So we don't need to decide this tonight,
No,
I don't think, but
that's an absolute brilliant suggestion.
yeah.
Because you get the whole pool as opposed to the 800 passionate people we get.
Right. No, the more the merrier, I think, on this question.
Yeah, I agree. And then what you've done is you've engaged voters who then could be educated that in order to get what they want, they have to come to the town meeting when this is on the warrant and actually vote for it, because it's a multi-step process. So I know there's a feeling of urgency among some folks on your team. My concern is that you rush and it doesn't get. John, did you want to add anything?
Yes, the only thing I wanted to add, Brooke, was if you do a non-binding question, you want to have sufficient detail in that question so people are not just, voting for some amorphous change. And I think the good thing is that the committee has done, in my opinion, a great job of already preparing a summary of what this would look like. And so you would want to have not 5 pages worth, but a couple of paragraphs in the non-binding question as to the form of what you mean when you say a town council form of government. 9 councilors elected as at large, the bullet points that Joe has already put together in his email.
Okay. So I would say, may I suggest that you take this feedback back to your group and then come back to us with your thoughts about, the different options for proceeding, and what your group thinks makes sense based on what you're hearing, the
Well,
sense of
and
our
I
board is.
we'll also know probably in, call it 2 months, give us another 2 months. We'll know how much more we've kind of gone through this process with the Collins Group. And also in terms of what we, give John and the folks at KP Law, it's going to be more than just an outline. It is a boilerplate charter. So, hopefully that's something that can help them in their work too. So, great.
Great. Okay, thanks
All set?
very much.
Thank you all
This is
very much. We
interesting.
really appreciate everybody's support.
Okay, terrific, thank you. And thanks to everybody on that group for the time spent, really appreciate it. Okay. Libby, do you want me to just go on Finance Department? Request for approval? Brian?
Good evening. Thank you, Madam Chair. So in the packet, in the AIS and the attached vote is a request to approve a bond sale on September 12th. The bonds dated October 4th in the amount of $24,175,000. These are bond anticipation notes dated 6 months from October 4th. We did receive 5 bids. The bids were, the sale was conducted by Hilltop Securities, our financial advisor. Jeffries LLC was the winning bidder with a net interest cost of 3.0321%. So in the AIS, we did outline what the bond anticipation notes would finance. $14 million of it is a rollover for the South Apron project for the airport. We have $1.5 million in that for C Street Force Main. That's for ineligible costs, mainly associated with construction oversight services by the OPR that we had. And we have Affordable Housing Trust of $8,325,000. The majority of that, as the board probably remembers, is to fund the grant for Gooseberry. And then we had some smaller amounts, Maya Comet Pond dredging project. We've had some engineering and entered into a couple contracts for approximately $250,000. So we financed that to continue to keep cash flow positive. And then we had about $100,000 that was charged against the landfill closure for some engineering and other work associated with that. So Erica, would you mind putting the vote up, please? So the vote was included in your package, so we would be seeking a favorable motion to approve the sale.
Any questions from the board of the pleasure?
So moved as detailed in our packet. Yep, voted September 18th today.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, and now David and Charles, you want to?
Good evening, everyone. David Gray, Sewer Director with Charles Johnson is our stormwater manager, and we have some pretty exciting news for us, and I'm going to let Charles handle giving you the short presentation just for approval.
Charles Johnson from the Sewer Department. We're here to request that the Select Board authorize the town manager to sign and file some documents that are associated with the grant from Mass DEP, an asset management grant, for the amount of $150,000. It also includes an in-kind service by the town of $165,000 for a CMMS asset management system. And this is a computerized maintenance management system, and it ties all of, we're looking at sewer, stormwater, and water assets throughout the town, or the island. And it includes GPS locations of all the assets and also information about when those assets were bought, including, so it can age the assets and include when they were maintained and keep track of that and update us when maintenance has to take place. It can include parts for pumps and all those assets. So it's a pretty powerful system that we've been looking at for probably 5 years now. And we've got the grant with some help by a consultant, and we're ready to move on it. And the sewer department and the water would be the first users of this, and it may, go townwide.
Any questions from the board? Getting grants is always a good thing. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Pleasure of the board?
Motion to
Second.
authorize?
Yeah. Second from Matt? Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Libby?
Thank you. So this next item here, Article 3 of the November 7th special town meeting, which is, as you can see there, at that town meeting, we adopted a Mass General Law, which involves the assessment of a community impact fee on professionally managed short-term rentals. So the board, after that special town meeting, had some subsequent discussion about when to implement it, and there was concern that it was being implemented too soon. It's based on a state schedule. So it was put off a bit until October 1st. This is a fee entirely administered by the state. We have gotten some inquiries about it and asked town council to come up with a summary of how it works. So there's a summary in your packet, and John, I think, will take us through the highlights of it. Questions included, the fee is based on when is the contract for what the fee would be assessed on, like before October 1st, after October 1st, what if it was signed over the summer, but the rental isn't until after October 1st? So there've been some very specific questions like that I think John can answer.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Yep.
Yep.
So under the law, and the law that we're talking about is Chapter 64G, which is basically the rooms tax legislation, which, as you know, I believe it was 2018, the legislature amended that to allow towns to assess that fee on short-term rentals. So that fee has, that tax, the local option tax, has been applied to all short-term rentals since the statute came into effect. It also, however, provided an opportunity for towns to impose a community impact fee of up to 3%. There were two options in the law. One was on the fee would be assessed on professionally managed units, and the second fee would be assessed on owner-occupied units. So in November of last year, town meeting did vote to adopt the first community impact fee, which is on professionally managed units, and the percentage rate was set at 3%. The way it works is the operator of the STR is required to collect and remit that tax, the fee to the Department of Revenue, and then the Department of Revenue in turn sends that back to the towns on a quarterly basis. As I said, the amount of the fee is 3% of the rental fee. And we'll get into that in just a minute. The fee goes into effect in the first calendar quarter, that is, commences after the town notifies the DOR of the adoption of the community impact fee. And so that notification was delayed, I believe intentionally, so that it would give people time to adjust to this new reality. The bottom line is it goes into effect on October 1st, and every person presumably on the state registry received a letter from the Department of Revenue saying that this fee goes into effect on October 1st of 2024. Unfortunately, the statute is not entirely clear, nor is the DOR letter as to what, in terms of the implementation date, it's silent on whether it applies to contracts, that were entered into either before the October 1st or after October 1st. And after looking at the structure of Chapter 64G and the way the rooms tax is collected, we came to the conclusion that it's reasonable to interpret the statute that it would only apply to short-term rental contracts that are signed on or after October 1st of 2024. So we think, as I said, we think that's a reasonable interpretation of the statute, which is less than clear on this particular question. One of the provisions in the law says the town must spend a minimum of 35% of the community impact fee revenue on either affordable housing or infrastructure. And so the way this is going to work is, as the town receives the fees from DOR, 35% of the fee will go into what is known as a receipts reserved for appropriation account, meaning it can be segregated from the general fund. It still needs to be appropriated, and there's a limitation placed on that appropriation. It has to be for either infrastructure or affordable housing. The remaining 65% gets deposited in the general fund. Now, if you go back to November of last year at the special town meeting, the next article after this one was to create a special purpose stabilization fund and to put for affordable housing, and to put 100% of this fee into that fund. That required a 2/3 vote, and it did not receive the required 2/3 majority vote. So as it stands now, 35% will be reserved for either infrastructure or affordable housing. The remainder of the fee will go into will go into the general fund.
John,
Yes.
can I interject and ask a question?
Yes.
The process by which that gets allocated and spent will just be part of the budget motion? Or does it have to be a separate article?
I don't
That's
think
Brian's
there's,
question.
I'm sorry, Brooke, I don't think there's any requirement. I don't think there's any requirement that it be a separate warrant article. But the funding source that funds your budget is going to have to specify how much is being transferred from this receipts reserve account. And as long as you are appropriating at least 35% for either affordable housing or infrastructure, you should be fine. I know we don't like to create a lot of different warrant articles, but that certainly would be an option as well, just appropriate it separately.
And just one other question. Is there a lot of detail about how affordable housing is defined? Like if we used it to offset the housing office cost, for instance, or?
No, there's no detail whatsoever other than the words affordable housing and infrastructure.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? All right, John,
Yeah,
sorry.
I had a couple things. One, I'm glad to hear that anything prior to October isn't included. I think I had a few different people reach out to me and they were concerned about how it would work. But the only other question I had for John is there was in this, it was page, what types of short-term rentals are liable to pay the community impact fee? There was a little legal description. The critical issue is whether the rental unit is located within a dwelling unit that includes the operator's primary residence. So basically what it's saying is if it's within, then it's not taxed. But if it's separate and they're both rented, then it's considered one lot could have two. Is this right, John? One lot with two houses that are rented separately becomes two rentals and becomes subject to this. Is that correct?
Yes, Matt, and I was just going to get to that section.
I beat you. All right.
So
Interrupted.
what's critical here is the definition of what is a professionally managed unit. And essentially it is, it is one of two or more short-term rental units that are located in the same city or town operated by the same operator and are not located within, and I think that's a critical word, a single-family, two-family, or three-family dwelling that includes the operator's primary residence. So let's just take an example. If you operate two short-term rentals on two different lots, neither one of which is the primary residence of the owner, you are subject to pay the fee on both of those units. If you have a lot and you live in your primary residence, and this was a specific question that was raised, I believe, by a realtor, and on that same lot, you have two other freestanding dwelling units that are suitable for rent, and you do rent them as short-term rentals, both of those are subject to pay the fee, even though they're located on the same lot as the single-family dwelling. That's the primary residence of the owner. If in that primary residence, however, there is a short-term rental unit within that single-family residence, then you do not pay the fee on that short-term rental. Another example was, well, what happens if you have an accessory dwelling unit in a garage that is not attached to your dwelling unit? We think that the rental that unit would be subject to the payment of the fee, of the community impact fee, because it is not located within the single family residence of the owner. Now we get down to really brass tacks, so to speak. Well, what happens if that garage is attached to the to the primary dwelling unit. Well, that we think makes it within the single family dwelling of the owner. So it would not be taxed. That's basically the way I came out on this. And I did talk to a couple of other people in my office just to make sure that I wasn't crazy, although they told me I might be crazy for other reasons, but not for this. So there was general agreement in my office that that's a reasonable interpretation of the statute.
Can I have a follow-up real quick?
Yeah.
Here's
Sure.
a question, John. I have two houses on my lot. I live in one
Yep.
and I rent the other as a short-term rental. And since it's only that I'm only renting that other house, I assume I don't have to pay, correct?
Right. It has to be one of two.
I got you. So now I'm gonna complicate it. All right, I rent that one and I decide that I want to rent my primary home for 2 or 3 weeks because I'm gonna go to France. Now I'm renting two houses. Does that mean I have to pay for both of those for that year?
I don't believe that's correct, Matt, because the one that's located within your primary residence is not subject to the fee.
All right, so then we're fine. Thank you.
Okay. Any
If
other
you- if you-
questions? John,
I'm sorry, I was going to say, but if you, across the street, if you own a separate, anywhere in town, another dwelling unit, then the second one on your primary residential lot, the other one gives you two, and so you would be subject to pay the fee.
okay. So John, does that complete your summary for us?
Let me just see
Or did you
here.
have other?
The only thing I wanted to add was, I wanted to make clear under every circumstance, you have to pay the rooms tax, and the rooms tax is 5.7% goes to the state. I believe Nantucket, if I'm not mistaken, has the local option of 6% rooms tax. So
Yes.
that gets paid to the town under all circumstances if it's an STR. It's only the 3% community impact fee that may or may not apply to your short-term rental, depending upon the facts.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board? Curtis?
Curtis Barnes, thank you. I want to follow up on Matt. I live on my property. I have one cottage that I rent. I am not therefore subject to this community impact fee. I do pay the 11.7% to the state. Okay, I just want to be sure that the single owner with one rental unit is clear on this. That is not a professional manager. It's just a local guy doing his job.
And if Curtis, you decide to go to France for the summer and rent your home,
I'll do that anytime you want to go.
you also don't pay because
Thank
it
you
is
very
your
much.
primary
Well,
residence.
summer I work very hard to keep my property up. Thank you.
John, did you want to add anything?
No, I was just going to say yes to Curtis's question.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Terrific. Board satisfied? Are we going to do any public outreach on this, just to remind everybody of the deadline?
Well, they are all getting something, whoever's registered anyway, with the state, from the state. They've all gotten a letter, as we understand it. And so I think that's the outreach. We will be sure to post the summary that's in the packet on the town website.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks, Libby.
And I know they've gotten it because I've gotten emails as a result of it already, so.
Yeah. Interesting.
Hopefully, things are much clearer now, although it is a little confusing if, understandably so. So the next item under town manager report, as was indicated at the beginning, the HTC operations review is tabled. A new date is under review with the consultants who prepared the review in the first place. It turned out no one from their firm could attend tonight. Next, the Waitt Drive seasonal dorm update. Participating remotely, we have Parker Hellwig, he's the architect for J&J Construction, the contractor for the project. John Lemieux and Brad Cole from the owner's project manager, that's our OPM, Vertex. The project has been in the development stage. I just want to give you a little background of it to remind everybody what this is all about. It's been in the development stage for at least 2 years. Site planning, design, and permitting have been completed. The project has progressed to a point where site work has actually started. The purpose of the project is for town employee housing, mostly seasonal. A new modern facility will help with recruitment of seasonal staff and will allow for more effective and efficient management of seasonal staff. And the facility can be used in the off-season for remote work staff when they are on island. Constructing a new consolidated and efficient space will free up other scattered and less efficient buildings and properties for other town uses. We have discussed this. So for example, we have some seasonal housing on Orkawa and Washington Street, and we're going to be starting to have internal discussions about reuse of those properties. Funding for this project, $11.7 million of funding comes from 2 appropriations. The 2022 annual town meeting and election appropriated $8.5 million, and supplemental funding of $3.2 was approved at the 2023 special. Additional detail is in the board's packet, and we are going to have Mr. Hellwig and Mr. Lemieux take us through the presentation. Parker, maybe you'll start.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Yes. So Parker Hellwig with J&J Contractors, and then also on the line is Brad with the owner's project manager with Vertex. So you go to the next slide. So just a quick project overview. The structure is roughly about 10,000 square feet. It is a 2-story building over on Waitt Drive. It is meant to accommodate roughly 50 occupants, primarily lifeguards. It's composed of 17 double or triple rooms, 1 apartment with 2 bedrooms, 1 apartment with a single bedroom, and as well as 1 accessible unit on the first floor. Contains common areas, kitchens, dining rooms, living rooms, laundry, and a study computers lounge. And it has 11 parking spaces in the off-street parking. Next slide, please. I believe Libby already discussed the funding of where the money was appropriated from and the various values from each appropriation source. So you could skip to the next slide. Here's an overall site plan of where the building is going to be located. It's kind of right at the connector from Waitt Drive onto Amelia. So it'll be right on the corner across from the fairgrounds parking lot, and next to it is the off-street parking. The image to the right is meant to depict, and this is still under some review with the town, a staging area for when the modular units are transported over to the island. We'll be storing them approximately in the area in red, and until they're all delivered to the site, at which time we will shuttle them over just across the street and set them in place. Next slide. Here's a rendering view from Waitt Drive facing south, depicting the primary entry. Here is the next slide, please. Here's another view from facing it from the east. As you can see, there is a second means of egress on the side of the building, nearest to the parking lot, which you can access the first and second floor from. And next slide, please. And this is the rear of the building from Amelia, heading towards Waitt Drive. Next slide. Overall project status. We are through our HDC approval with just had a final Exhibit A that we worked with the committee with, and we're just waiting for the final certificate of appropriateness to be issued by the administrative staff. We have filed for our site enabling and foundation permit, which is underway. We have mobilized to the site as of September 4th. Site clearing, which was just some tree removal and brush, began on the 6th, and then we're going to be fully mobilizing with perimeter fencing and beginning to do our excavating for our foundation this upcoming week. Next slide, please. Overall project schedule. As I mentioned, we will really get underway with our site work next Monday. The modular buildings are set to arrive starting in December through the majority of that month. We'll be setting the building on its foundation in January, and then we're looking for a substantial completion in April, so the building is ready for use for this coming summer season. Next slide, please. And then Brad's going to jump in and talk about the budget.
Yes, thank you, Parker. Overall, the total project budget, as Libby had mentioned, is $11.7 million. Committed to date is about 10.59. Spend to date is 1.03, so that will start to increase quickly as construction is just commenced. Budget risks at this point are really the PCOs that have been submitted. There are multiple under review, though the most significant of which were really directly related to the time and design related to the direction by the Historic District Commission, as well as Vertex. We are also starting the owner FF&E procurement and testing inspections. And at this point, the project is tracking under budget, though the change orders that have been proposed to us will significantly impact the remaining contingency, though these costs are being reviewed by the team right now. Thank you, Parker. Next slide, please. I think you're still on mute, by the way, Parker.
Thank you, Brad. Yes, so just talking about hurdles and the forecast that we are doing.
We're losing your voice there.
Parker, you got to speak up.
Oh, sorry about that. Yes, so as you can tell, I'm not at my office. I'm at gymnastics lessons, so I apologize. So the largest challenge that we see facing this project is going to be working with the utility provider, National Grid, to get the three-phase power service, which is required for this building, to our project site. We are intending to bring our service over from the transformer near the commercial kitchen on Amelia. It's going to come up the Waitt Drive connector and onto our site, where we'll have a new pad-mounted three-phase transformer. So the challenges we foresee with that, as with any project, is just a lack of control over the utility provider. We are trying to stay ahead of them. They've been provided all of the engineering documents required for their own design and engineering, as well as all required site mapping. The next steps for them are going to be getting an easement approval coming through this select board for the routing of the new service to the property, and just overall dealing with the global challenges of getting the design approved, getting the funding approved, and having them complete their work, and hoping that it aligns with our overall project schedule. So they're challenges that we're aware of. They're challenges that we're mitigating, but we would definitely look for town support to help them along when it's within our ability. So you go to the next slide, please. Any questions?
Questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple. What were the changes HDC asked for?
A lot of it was just from the initial submission of the RFP that we provided a bid on. Just a lot of it came to do with some aesthetic choices. Conversion of the roof system from a gable to a hip unfortunately made it no longer conducive to a modular manufacturer's offsite production. So just some changes like that. Some of the exterior entryways were enlarged to kind of bring the scale of the building down. Some conversions from corner boards to cottage corners, belly bands to flared bands, number and sizing of windows, things along those natures were. It was a lot of aesthetic decisions that impacted the overall cost of the project, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, it's a nice looking building, so they were probably good moves. And then as we go,
overall, it is a good movie.
Yeah, overall, can we get a detailed budget of what it'll cost, and then get a budget to date occasionally? Is that something that is available?
That's something that actually Vertex does do every month. So towards about the middle of every month, we already work with you guys and tell you exactly where you guys are with everything.
Yeah, I would love it just to, sort of see what aspects, how much is it for the, for the shell, how much is it for the next part? I'd love
Yep.
to see detail. Thanks.
Not a problem. Thank you.
And I'm curious about the process for that easement that we have to grant.
I can actually answer that. It's Erica Mooney. So you can't grant an easement to National Grid until and unless town meeting approves that. So we're gonna have to draft an article for the 2025 annual town meeting. In the meantime, we can do a license agreement with them to bridge that time frame. So that's gonna have to be something that we work on.
Okay, thanks, Erica. Okay, anything else? Delighted to see it moving forward. Okay, moving on to select board reports. We are going to get an update from GE. Thanks, you guys, for the presentation.
Thank you all.
Update from the GE Vineyard Wind team on the environmental assessment framework, and I'm going to ask them to turn on their cameras and unmute. And Roger, I'm assuming you're going to take the lead on this?
Chair Moore, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, thank you very much. As you mentioned, what we'd like to do is share with you an update on the environmental assessments. Happy to take any other questions you, the select board, or the community might have to the extent we can address them if appropriate. Regarding the environmental assessment, if I could just step back for a minute, please. We started from the beginning hearing the community's kind of concerns and considerations and the select board's concerns and considerations regarding the environmental impacts of the Blade incident. And so we've looked at kind of a three-step approach to how to be very responsive to those concerns. I think at the outset, what we wanted to do within the first 10 days was to make sure we were expediting and accelerating an assessment of the debris that the community was seeing on the beaches and in the ocean close to the shoreline. So we had retained Arcadis, which is a global environmental consulting firm, to do an independent assessment of that debris that people were concerned about physical contact on the beaches and so on. And I think we've gone through that to some extent. So we're not going to plan to cover that today, but that was kind of part one of the assessment. But as we described that in our discussions together, we always said that was not the end of the analysis or the end of the story. We knew there was more to do. We had some ideas on what we wanted to do or thought was appropriate to do, but we also wanted to be very solicitous of the select board, of the community, and of other government stakeholders. So in the time since, we've consulted with you, we've consulted with Massachusetts DEP, the Division of Marine Fisheries, with the federal family, Bessie, and the federal agencies, and with the tribes as well. And that has, I think, enabled us to really understand the community's priorities in addition to what we anticipated would be the issues. And so we've continued to ask Arcadis to do a lot of work here, and we thought the timing was appropriate to come back and give you some of those updates on some of the further work that's been going on. And so, as I mentioned, the first step of this was kind of addressing the immediate debris that you were seeing on the shore and on the beaches. The second step, which I think is the primary update for tonight, is we heard feedback from all of our stakeholders that on an assumption that we would not recover 100% of the debris, and we think that's a fair assumption, we're going to recover much of it, a lot of it, but probably not 100%. What would be any potential risks of long-term degradation of any debris that would remain in the ocean? Would there be chemical risks associated with that, as that might break down over time? So that's going to be the focus for this evening. I'll give perhaps a layperson's explanation. The Arcadis team's on the phone to give a better informed technical explanation for questions and things like that. But just to clarify too, and I'll come back to this, even this discussion tonight is not the end of our analysis. We've also heard a strong feedback from the community. I think, Chair, you've been the strongest advocate for this, about other impacts beyond just chemical degradation in the ocean, including impacts to shellfish and physical impacts to shellfish from the ocean and other things. So we'll give a preview tonight of where we're going with that. But tonight to focus primarily on kind of what has been Arcadis's assessment of, again, any debris, a hypothetical situation where debris could continue to degrade in the ocean, and any impacts to chemicals. So a couple first principles here as we approach the assessment and the conclusions. A couple things that we've asked Arcadis to do from the beginning. First is to be very conservative in their calculations and their assessments and their assumptions. And by conservative, I mean protective, to err on the side of being protective, to make the calls that are conservative, and to make assumptions that we would think would be on the more protective side. So we'll walk through some of those types of assumptions. The second is to make sure, as we've said before, that they're working, independently, that they're following the science, and that we're not here to influence their outcomes. We're here to understand it. We're here to maybe help communicate some of it, but we want them to continue to be fully independent as scientists, as technical experts, and to also follow the science, not to rule anything out, but to go where the science takes them. So with that, we have kind of the process for the assessment they did for potential degradation of remaining debris, and the impacts on chemicals. And I want to start with what their assumptions were. And this is to the point about being conservative and being protective. They made a number of assumptions that I think are quite conservative. The first one was that they are assuming that 100% of the blade would remain in the ocean. In other words, they're assuming we recover 0% of the blade. Now, we know that's not the case. We've already recovered large pieces of it, and there's a piece remaining to be recovered on the top, on the root. But they wanted to go with that very conservative assumption. Let's just assume 100% of the blade. We won't debate what's left and what's there. They also assumed that 100% of that blade would degrade, that it would not remain intact, and that it would effectively degrade into the ocean and so on. Again, not a realistic assumption, but something they wanted to do to be conservative. They assumed that the debris would be located very close in proximity to the southern beaches and Nantucket. Again, that's not what we're finding. We'll talk about this. The debris is actually very close to the turbine itself, but they wanted to be conservative. So they made an assumption that they would calculate this based on the debris being close to the beach in Nantucket. And they also assumed, I think kind of the last conservative assumption here, that there would be no dilution, that, again, the blade would remain relatively intact close to the beaches in Nantucket. No further dispersion across the ocean. Someone could say, well, the ocean's very big and things get diluted. We're not making that argument for here. We want to just assume that effectively this isn't a big tub around the south of Nantucket, and that everything's kind of staying in place. These are kind of those most protective assumptions we could use. Oh, there was one more I should add. They're also applying a drinking water standard. So as you might imagine, a drinking water standard, EPA's drinking water standards are significantly more protective than salt water, seawater, things like that. There are some recreational standards for surfers and swimmers and things like that, but we wanted to focus on something much more protective, the equivalent of the water you would take out of the tap as drinking water using those EPA standards. So we start with kind of those conservative assumptions, and then we get into the process. And what Arcadis did is they looked at the material safety data sheets, so they could see the chemicals that comprise the components in the blade. And they looked at the blade composition itself, really trying to understand the blade, what's in it, what's put together, combining those data sheets with the actual blade. And what you do with that is you look at, of all those materials, of all those components, where do you have potential chemicals of concern? Not everything in every material is going to be of concern. We all interact with, things in modern life that have a number of different kinds of materials. And when you're looking at what potentially presents a risk, is you're looking at what are the potential chemicals of potential concern. So these are things that could potentially be hazardous or cause concerns about toxicity and things like that. So they went through and identified those. And then they basically compared kind of the chemicals of potential concerns and their concentrations using these very conservative assumptions, compared that to established kind of health-based regulatory criteria. So these are things, kind of regulatory standards that are set from the EPA, set from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, again, for EPA drinking water standards coming out of the tap. And what this assessment concluded was that for each of the chemicals of potential concern, all would be under those regulatory thresholds, even with these very conservative assumptions. So 100% of the blade in the water, close to Nantucket, drinking water standards, no degradation, no dispersion, and things like that. So that was effectively the conclusion of this assessment, that looking at the chemicals, looking at the potential breakdown with these assumptions, you would still have these concentrations below the regulatory risk-based concern. So that was kind of part one of what we wanted to share tonight. And again, Arcadis is on the phone with us. They can dive deeper into this with you. If you'd allow me, please, I'd like to just take maybe 2 more minutes to update 2 other things, and then would be welcome to hear your questions and your feedback in the community. I mentioned that this is not the end of the analysis. We started with the immediate analysis on the debris, the physical contact with the debris. This is now the chemical assessment for debris that may remain in the water. But there's a further step, and I think this goes to the community's focus and interest on shellfish in particular. We want to very much focus on that. We want to do specific testing of both water, sediment, and shellfish themselves. So we're going to look at the beds in Nantucket. We're going to look at the beds in Martha's Vineyard. We're very thankful for the Nantucket Department of Natural Resources and the folks at the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries who have really helped us understand, as well as yourself, Chair, who really helped us understand the beds and the nature of the harvest and things like that. So Arcadis is going to overlay the location of those beds, where we're going to be doing direct sampling of shellfish themselves, water in those proximities, as well as sediment. That sampling is going to start this week, and we will be sharing, obviously results with that at the earliest opportunity. We hope some of that will be within a week or so, and some will take a little longer. That sampling is going to focus on kind of physical, potential physical impacts. So things like fiberglass and microparticulates. I think we've done the chemical assessment. We shared that outcome, but we want to make sure that we're looking at all the possibilities. And so that's going to be more focused on, is there any kind of concern or risk with microparticles and the fiberglass. We're not implying there is, but we want to make sure we go through the analysis again, not ruling anything out at this point. The final update I had was on the subsea debris. Just to kind of remind where we're at, we were able around August 13th to remove the hanging debris from the blade, and that significantly reduced the risk of further debris entering the water. I think we've seen that. We also removed the debris that was kind of resting on the transition piece at the bottom of the turbine. So as of August 13th, we had, I think, significantly reduced the risk of debris. Having said that, we all know debris had entered the ocean prior to that. So around August 21st, August 22nd, we deployed a sonar vessel to survey the area within a 500-meter radius of the turbine, AW38, and to map the area around the turbine. And what the survey did find the debris on the ocean floor. It found it in about 15 different locations, and all of that was within 150 meters. So we did a whole 500-meter sweep, but all the debris that has been found has been within that closest 150-meter radius of the turbine, again, kind of reinforcing that that's where we're focused, that's where we're looking. The debris that the sonar has detected is not within any marine sensitive areas. It's also not in any areas where there's been mapped unexploded ordnances. So the plan is in October, probably by the end of October, to go back and get it with a vessel, remove it from the subsea floor, and to address that part of the debris as well, to address that longer term. So a number of updates there. Thank you for letting me go through all of that. I know there's a lot. And so I would, maybe if I could just pause and ask Arcadis if there's anything they want to clarify or correct that I might have gotten wrong. And then respectfully, Chair, we'd welcome your questions and any comments.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, hi Roger. This is Adam Ayers with Arcadis. No, all spot on. So happy to field any questions that folks may have.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Okay, all quiet. Okay, I am going to take questions from the public.
I'll have a couple when she's done.
Okay, yeah.
Hi, Val Oliver. Thank you for letting me ask some questions. My first question is, Arcadis is a company that works around the world on sustainable energy projects, so I'm wondering how impartial their data will actually be. since they are helping to promote those? That's my first question. I think you just answered this, but I want a little more clarification. Did the blade that went down to the bottom of the ocean floor get taken away, or is it going to be taken away eventually? And you were talking about the assumptions of where the debris went, and I had read in some of newspapers that it went as far as Montauk, New York. So is there really a plan that can map where it's going to go, given the ocean changes and water moving around? And lastly, the cause of the failure. I'm still very concerned about that. I know you've stopped putting blades on the turbines, but the turbines are still going in. And if there is no definitive information on that, how do you move forward putting blades in that may have the same failure that's never been identified? Thank you.
Thanks, Val.
Chair, may I take those questions, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Oliver, for the questions. I think you've touched on a couple of points that I'm sure on folks' minds. On the impartiality question, what I would say about that is we have full faith in Arcadis's impartiality. I think the folks have impressed us as here to find the science. And all I can say on that is, we've shared their reports before. We've shared a summary of the analysis I just walked through. I think it's in the agenda materials. I would just encourage the community to look at that themselves. I'm not going to, pretend that I can, my view can influence your view on that. But I do think the science stands for itself. I think they have done a very transparent job documenting their assessments in a lot of details, their assumptions, their conservative assumptions. And I do believe the science speaks for itself. And I would encourage anyone to draw whatever conclusions they would like, but we do have full confidence in the impartiality. On the question, yes.
Roger, before you move on to the next, Val, I also would like to add that the Mass DEP has been overseeing the development of this assessment framework, as has our own Natural Resources Department. We've been in meetings with the team as they've developed this framework and given them extensive feedback, correcting some things, adding some things, and so forth. So we've been monitoring the development this ourselves as well as the state. So
I think that's good. Thank you.
okay.
It's a very fair point. Thank you.
Move on to the next one, Roger.
Yeah, so you asked a question about the components of the blade being taken away, and thank you for letting me clarify that. The answer is yes. So as I mentioned, we did the sonar subsea survey, and it did find pieces of the blade on the subsea floor in about 15 locations. So we will go back and take those away. And that will be done. We're looking to start that around the end of October. We can line up vessels and things like that. So we want to remove what we found from the subsea floor. No question. I mean, no dispute on our side about that. You asked about further dispersion to Montauk. I don't know that I recall hearing about Montauk specifically, but I get your point that there was debris reported, in I think in Connecticut and other places, which would suggest that the debris, was in a wide pattern. Though the debris that folks have found in those places have been removed. There's been a team of consultants and workers who have kind of responded, been a quick response team to anywhere where there's been debris reported. So those areas have been addressed and continues to work to this day. I don't know that we've seen anything recently, but we continue to have a team of folks kind of in the field on standby, ready for anything that might be reported. And the chair is also very good about passing on information she's hearing from the community.
Adam, could
so
you,
we can
please?
When he's done.
Track those down.
No, I'm asking Adam. There we go.
And then finally, you asked about, the question about your concerns about the failing again. And I was able to kind of summarize this in a prior board select meeting, but I'd be happy to do so again. We've we've completed the root cause analysis I think we've shared. And as a result of that, we're taking a number of what we call corrective actions. These are things that we will be, procedures we will be putting in place before
The
any
little
blade.
robots?
Yes, thank you. That's one of the three. So the first one is we are double checking all the scans and the pictures that we took of the blades. We took about 7,000 UT scans per blade. So all of those are being double checked and looked at before anything is kind of either installed or operating. The second is, as you mentioned, robots. We have effectively drones. They're called crawlers. They go inside the blades and they can do live inspections with videos and pictures of the condition of the blade as it exists today. And we're also calibrating fiber optic sensors in the blades, so we have real-time software analytics that can give a heads up on any issue. So we've always said here, we want to be thorough and not rushed. And I think the fact I'm speaking to you here in September and we're still working on these issues when this was in July, it reinforces the thoroughness of what we're doing and not putting pressure or being rushed. So we continue to be thorough on all of these actions and all of these inspections before there's any further operations.
I have one other
Yeah, I have a
question when you
follow-
have a chance.
Yeah, I have a follow-up on the debris issue. What my understanding is you wanted to collect the debris to weigh it, to understand how much of the broken blades you've recovered. What percent of the, have you recovered to date? And, when you're looking at that weight, are you adjusting it for the water that's inevitably probably soaking in? So what percent of the blade have you recovered to date, do you feel?
Thank you, sir. You're correct. We are doing what we call a mass balance test, which will weigh the full components of the recovered blade and compare that to the weight of the blade. It even goes a little deeper than that. It looks at, separates the fibers from the wood and different types of components, so we can even get a more detailed assessment. That is still ongoing. Part of the challenge is we have to remove the debris that's on the ocean floor. So we will update you when we have more information, but that's ongoing right now. And let me just ask Arcadis if there's anything they want to add on the process there in terms of the mass balance.
Hi, Roger. This is Adam. Yeah, you're correct. So debris is, we have teams in the field that are picking up debris as it, washes out. We see minimal debris currently, on the shore and things like that. And so that mass balance is ongoing as we sort of put all the information together. But you're right, it's a work in progress as the debris will be removed from the ocean floor. So don't have final numbers on the percentages yet, but will once all that debris has been collected.
And Adam, can you address the question Mr. Fee had about the impact of the water on the mass balance calculation?
Yeah, I think as this goes forward, debris that's been picked up to date is being stored as we're directed to do. So my sense is that the water will that's impregnated that will really just be removed as the material sits there and dries. So I think it's a good point. We'll certainly take that into consideration as we're doing the mass balance. But I think some of this, it will dry over time. And so that'll be in consideration as well. But you're right, Roger. We'll go through all of the debris. Look at the different pieces of it. We have room to sort of lay it all out so we can get eyes on it. So it'll be a weight calculation, but it'll also sort of be like a volume calculation that we can see what is all there and sort of lay it out and sort of reconstruct things.
Okay, thank you. So Val, have your questions all been answered? And do you have a follow-up?
Well, I have one other question, but I see there's other people who want.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Let's, there's not a long line.
Just
so-
wanted to, I know, I noticed that tonight. That's because we were at town meeting last night. The gentleman who just spoke was saying, they don't want to rush through this process. They want to do the right thing. But I feel this process has been rushed from the beginning through the permitting process. And it's evident now that we are, I know I keep saying this, but we are the guinea pigs of this industry. They've never been made this big. We are the test ground for this, and I would seriously like to be assured that there will be no more blades put up on these things until there is an absolute reason for all of the failure, and we should just not push forward because our governor wants to meet these goals. That's my point.
So I'm not going to have you answer that, Roger. I'm going to answer that. And I just want you to know, the community to know that I am in constant contact with Boehm on that question of when the steps of restarting the project and the dependencies upon which they, the hoops they have to jump through, as it were, doing my best to keep and advocate for that not to happen any more quickly than we have information. And I do know that Bessie is doing their own independent root cause analysis on top of GE's internal one. So there's multiple layers to the process of analyzing what happened, which will lead to the timeline and dependencies upon which the project will be allowed to continue to move forward at some point in time, presumably. But we're also working on making sure they have a debris response plan in place. So the experience we had won't be repeated in the way that we experienced it.
It won't be repeated if I have my way.
Well, I understand that. So anyway, I wanted to answer that.
Thank
I think
you.
it's a good point. I think the future is a really good point to emphasize. I know Brooke is doing that, but I think, that sort of what I'm hearing from a lot of people is that this is a warning, and let's make sure, what else besides, what is our future risk with blades? What is our future risk with other things? Is there oil or are there other pollutants? How can we guarantee that the state and that the companies are going to take care of it? That's a short version of what we are really hearing. And I think it's important that they know that how seriously people still are taking it. And it's not necessarily this one thing. This one issue was a warning and a wake-up
I
call.
think it was a blessing,
Yes.
actually,
Yeah.
because there's a
So-
lot worse that can happen if you read all of the information.
So I think that's that. I just want to state that. That's what I'm hearing.
I'm going to, Bruce has had his hand up patiently, so online, Eric, if you could allow him.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've heard several times in the discussion that GE Vernova has the ability to review, the number tossed around was 7,000 scans of the blades. And I would like to know what that review of the failed blade scans has shown them to be the cause of this failure.
Roger?
Thank you. Mr. Mandel, thank you for the question. The review of the blades for this, the review of the scans for this blade unfortunately did show that there were adhesives that were not properly applied at a critical part of the blade. So the inspection of the UT scans for this blade were quite clear on that. And it's a combination of the fact that the adhesives were not properly applied, as well as the fact that our quality assurance program didn't catch it and should have caught it. So that is a process we continue to go through for all of the other blades, looking at all the UT scans with second set of eyes. I think I said before, sometimes you go to the doctor and he or she reads your MRI, and then you take it to the next doctor. You kind of want that second opinion. That's roughly analogous, I think, to how we're approaching that first step. In addition to that, we're doing these physical inspections. We're not just relying on the UT scans. We're doing the physical inspections. We've calibrated sensors for operations. I should mention one more thing too, which I failed to mention earlier. I don't think I even mentioned it the last time we were together because we continue to look at additional things we could be doing. We're also, I appreciate the chair talking about, you know, the oversight from Bessie and the engagement we have with other regulators, which we've participated very closely in. But we've also been working with independent organizations ourselves to kind of verify everything we're doing. So for the analysis I just shared you, it's what we call a root cause analysis. We employed another company called Gulf Wind, which is kind of the leading or one of the leading companies in the space to kind of independently review this situation and come up with its own root cause analysis, which was consistent with ours. But also on the blades that we're inspecting, we have another independent body, it's a certification agency, looking at those processes as well. So again, until anything comes back to service, all these additional steps are happening. In addition, consulting with this, separate groups to look at our root cause analysis and to be looking at the processes we're using to re-inspect all of the blades.
Thank you for that explanation. I understand what you're saying is that there was an adhesive failure in the manufacturing of this blade. And what assurances are you giving us that this failure in the process was restricted to a single blade on that single turbine, considering there were other blades manufactured at that plant in the same process that have ended up on other turbines off our shore? How do we know this was just an isolated mistake?
Well, Mr. Mandel, I think it goes back to the actions that we're taking. For all the blades that have been installed and for all the blades that would be installed, we're looking at all of these steps, the re-inspecting the UT scans, looking at the physical inspections, installing these sensors. So safety is the top priority. Doing everything we can to preventing this from happening again is our top priority. And it's why we're being thorough and not rushed, is we want to be able to do exactly what you're asking us to do and be able to make sure we're going through each blade in detail before anything operates again. That's the process we're following right now.
Okay, I don't think you answered my question. I wanted to know what assurances we have that the blades that already are installed don't have that same adhesive failure on it.
I apologize. I think I've answered the question to the extent I can, which are the processes we're doing to inspect that, to be able to give you the assurance to the extent we can.
So
we're inspecting all those blades on the turbines.
So have your inspections been concluded on all the blades that have been installed?
No, the inspections are still ongoing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Val, one more?
Two things. One is the blades that were inspected when they came into Massachusetts near Boston couldn't fit in the building that they were going to be inspected in, so they had to cut 50 feet off to bring them in and do an inspection. And I wonder how that calculates to a proper inspection, number one. And number two, my question is for you guys. Last year's, spring town meeting, 78 passed asking for more transparency in negotiations and discussions with these wind companies. And I'm wondering when we can be included in those discussions.
So I'll have Roger answer the question about the inspection.
Okay.
Ms. Oliver, thank you. I believe the building you're referring to in Boston is not part of our inspection process. We're able to inspect the full length of the blades. That's typically done in our factories, but now we're doing it also on site in other places. But I believe, I'm not super familiar with the building in Boston, but I don't think that goes specifically, respectfully, to the inspection of the blades. I think that's a separate issue, and I'm sorry I don't have more information on that.
Separate blades, I guess.
I don't want to speculate, so please, I apologize, but my understanding that goes it's not related specifically to the testing of blades that ultimately are installed and operating. But I don't want to say much more just because I'm not very familiar. I don't want to misrepresent anything. Thank you.
Okay. And as to the question of open process in terms of negotiations, what is happening currently is happening in executive session for reasons stated in those agendas. And when we're able to do more in the public space, we will do so. So,
Is that at the advice of your legal counsel?
town council.
Thank you.
Jason?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason Graziadei, Nantucket Current. I think since the last time GE and Roger were here, there has been another failure of a GE Halyard X turbine at Dogger Bank. This would be the third failure of a blade in 5 months. So I'm wondering if Roger could update on the situation at Dogger Bank, and is it GE Vernova's position that each of these failures is because of a different cause? And just if you could update on the situation at Dogger Bank and what happened there with the third blade failure. Yeah, I think it was late August. Thank you.
Roger?
Yes, thank you. We have communicated that the three incidents are unrelated to each other. The situation at Dogger Bank, the one that's being referred to, happened during the commissioning of the turbine, during installation, and effectively during kind of the maintenance procedures that go along with those procedures. We have, as a result of that, implemented several additional kind of procedures and corrective actions and layers of defense to again reduce the risk of that happening again, but unrelated to the manufacturing defect that we have been discussing at Vineyard Wind.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board at this time? Okay, well, appreciate you guys all coming back again, and I expect we'll have you back when there's more information on the environmental assessment data and the outcomes. We'll want to have you come back and give the community an update at that time.
Just one more,
Matt?
I think about one more comment is, I have had people ask about the questions that are online. And
thanks,
I
Matt.
will say that, we've done a good job, or, I would say, Rick and staff and Florencia have done a good job of putting as many that we've received up, and we're asking for clarification on others. If you asked a question and you don't see it online, you probably should send it again. And the email is communications@nantucket/ma.gov. And I think that we did get some transcripts, and Florencia did go through it, but I understand some of them were not there. One of the questions that I think is getting put back up, I told the person to do it, is what other pollutants are available, are there, and what else could happen. That should be put on there and be answered. And so we are, doing our due diligence on that end of things.
Yep. So I believe there were 3 questions remaining that weren't answered, and I would say one of them was answered by tonight's presentation. That was about the chemical compounds. So, yeah, and I'll reiterate my appreciation to Florencia and her team and Rick for all the work that they've been putting in to keep the questions, and please email that address if you have any questions, new questions or unanswered questions. So-
Communications@nantucket.ma/ma.gov.
Yeah, -MA.
-ma.gov. I got it right here.
Accurate. Okay, terrific. Thanks, everybody online for coming tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, moving along, any committee reports from the board? Any updates? Okay. All right, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thanks, everybody. Have a good night.